Hey everyone, Winaway here. Just made this video to quickly cover elemental reactions and how they work. Let's get straight to the point. We'll start with elemental debuffs. These debuffs are applied when an enemy is subjected to any of these elements. An enemy can have a maximum of 2 debuffs, since you can't stack 3 elements in them. And you have to bear in mind that these debuffs also apply to you when you have these elements on yourself, not just your enemy. Electro will cause Elemental Burst, aka your ultimate, to get drained of its energy, so your ultimate will actually start decharging. Hydro will increase your elemental skill, aka your E cooldown. Pyro will burn you over time, and Cryo will increase your stamina consumption when you're dashing, sprinting, etc. For instance, if you're on fire, let's say, you soaked yourself with water to get rid of the damage, but little did you know that now you're wet, your E will have a longer cooldown. Okay, moving on to elemental reactions. So the first one's pretty straightforward. When Pyro is applied to Dendro, a powerful burn dot is applied onto the target or yourself. Geo, when it comes into contact with any other elements, will produce a crystal that you can pick up that will shield you against that same element. Electro and Hydro, when combined, it places a flat damage dot on the target, dealing 2 ticks of electro damage, and it also forks to other nearby targets. And this elemental reaction scales with level and elemental mastery only. Being exposed to both Cryo and Hydro will freeze the target or yourself for 3.5 seconds, and you can shatter the frozen target with a Claymore or with Geo for extra damage. This will deal physical damage though, bear that in mind. Therefore, it will also benefit from Superconduct. The way Vaporize works is when you use Hydro on a target that's already affected by Pyro, so burning, you will deal double your total damage after everything else is factored in. The other way around, when you do Pyro on a wet target, you will actually just deal 1.5 times the total damage, so it's more effective to use Hydro on a Pyro rather than the other way around. So this is why Melt and Vaporize are so strong, especially late game, as it's a multiplicative component at the end of the damage formula that basically multiplies the whole total damage you can end up dealing. The way this works is it factors in all the other modifiers that increase your damage, such as your attack, your elemental or physical damage increase percentages, your crit damage, your talent percentages, so on and so forth. Melt is the exact same as Vaporize in terms of mechanics, but this time around you actually want to finish with Pyro on an enemy affected by Cryo, burning an enemy that's already frozen. Both of these also get affected by Elemental Mastery, in the sense that Elemental Mastery increases the 1.5 or 2 times multiplier that Melt or Vaporize provides you by a certain percentage, albeit not too huge, so roughly around 15-20% on an average EM build character. Overload deals Pyro damage in an AoE around the target when Electro and Pyro come into contact, and it also knocks back the target a tiny bit. Overload also just scales with level and Elemental Mastery only. Superconduct deals AoE Cryo damage when Electro and Cryo come into contact and reduces all affected parties' physical resistance by 50% for 8 seconds. Now, if the enemy had 30% physical resistance, for instance, any reduction beyond 0, meaning bringing the resistance below 0, will only count as half. In this case, 50 minus 30, we have 20 more resistance reduction remaining due to Superconduct. But since the enemy resistance is already at 0, it will only be reduced by another 10% instead of 20%, for a total of minus 10%, meaning 10% increased physical damage taken by that target. This damage also only scales with level and elemental mastery. By this damage, I mean Superconduct's own damage itself, not the physical damage that you deal at an increased rate thanks to the debuff. As for Swirl, Swirl spreads any element it comes into contact with and deals extra elemental damage of a Nemo type. The damage yet again scales with level and elemental mastery only. All of these are categorized under 2, amplifications and transformations. Melt and Vaporize, the ones which scale the best later and deal potentially double, maybe 1.5 damage, are the only amplifications. Pretty straightforward terminology, as they simply amplify the damage you'd otherwise do. The rest are all flat damage that scale with level and elemental mastery, and they can't crit. Therefore, early on and mid-game, they're very powerful even with minimal stats and investment due to their inherent nature of having flat damage that increases with level. But later on, they get outclassed by Melt and Vaporize, though only very much so later, so you don't actually need to worry about it for the time being, except for characters you're investing in that you're planning for later use. That's why you should just invest in your main DPS, who's preferably Pyro or Hydro for the 2x amplification down the line. Pyro, unfortunately, always weighs heavier since they've also got other nice things going on for them. In terms of the flat damage ratios for the transformation reactions, if we were to assume that Superconduct deals damage at a ratio of 1, then in relation to that, Swirl would be 1.2, as in dealing 20% more damage than Superconduct. Shatter would be 3, Overload would be 4, and then Electrocharge would be 4.8, but do bear in mind that Electrocharge occurs in 2 ticks of 2.4, resulting in a total of 4.8. Therefore, in a single hit, which takes as much time as a single tick of Electrocharge, that is 2.4, Overload will do 4, therefore more damage. That is if you can keep triggering Overload over and over again. Otherwise, Electrocharge is still 4.8 after 2 ticks regardless, against Overload's total 4. So if you triggered Overload only once, then Electrocharge will still deal more total damage. So here's a nice old chart that depicts what I just explained. Pause the video to have a look. And here's a more detailed chart with explanations that also mentions that you can't have 2 reactions on at the same time, with 1 to 2 seconds cooldown between applying the 2. It also goes over some advanced swirl mechanics, indicating that swirl causing elemental reaction due to the enemy element, like slimes always being their own type, or environmental elements present on the floor. Then Ventes, in this instance the Anemo character's elemental mastery, will count. If it is triggered normally by another character, then that character's elemental mastery will count. You should also know that it is rather clunky to apply elemental reactions with skills like Fischl's Oz or Xiangling's Guba, which stay on the field and apply periodical elemental damage, as they might end up triggering rather than your on the field character ending up triggering the reaction, which will count Fischl's or Xiangling's elemental mastery in this case instead. Or could be the other way around. If you build elemental mastery on those 2 support characters, it could result in lower damage again because your non-elemental mastery main DPS on the field happened to trigger the elemental reactions this time. So, as you can see, it could oscillate between one character or the other, creating rather shabby inconsistency. So the best bet is to leave elemental mastery to some set bonuses that you can get away with early on. Alright, moving on. Let's talk about elemental resonance. These are party bonuses that you receive based on pairs of certain elemental type characters that are present in your party. So having 2 Geo characters in the party at the same time will increase resistance to interruption, as in your animation getting interrupted mid-cast, run, jump or swing, and also gives you 15% attack when you have a shield on yourself. Double Pyro reduces duration of cryo debuff on your characters by 40% and gives 25% attack to all your characters in the party. This makes the already strong Pyro element even stronger. It's one of the go-tos since having 2 of the same element in the party also increases your energy gain, which I'll explain in a future video, but just know for the time being that that's the case. And it essentially has to do with elemental orb and particle generation. Double Hydro does the same debuff duration reduction that the others do for Pyro in this case, and it increases healing received by 30% for all your party members. Double Anemo reduces stamina consumption by 15%, it increases your movement speed by 10% and reduces your skill, which is your E, cooldown by 5%. This is really good for traveling, climbing, gliding, dashing, overall exploration. Just put 2 enemy characters when you're exploring. Double Electro does the debuff reduction again, this time for Hydro effects, and makes all electro reactions generate an additional electro elemental particle, but it has an internal cooldown of 5 seconds, so you can't just keep getting more and more particles. Again, what this means is that you'll get your ultimate up much faster, as that's what the game means whenever you see the words particle, orb, regen, or recharge. Double Cryo reduces electro debuff duration by 40% and increases your crit chance against frozen enemies or enemies just simply affected by the cryo debuff. So they don't necessarily need to be frozen, just you need to cast something cryo on them to benefit from this crit buff. And if you're going the ultimate simp super Viper simulator with Vipers of a different element for a variety of tastes and experiences, then you get the overall elemental resistance boost of 15% against all elements. There will be a video about characters as well as team compositions and how to build both, but just know that your party setup completely depends on your main DPS, on whom you will focus and make all your investments in terms of level, weapon and talents. If your main is a Pyro, get another Pyro to accompany him, it's a no-brainer, 25% attack, more energy recharge. Get an Electro to trigger Overload on top of that, especially early on when it's the strongest, and later on you'll want Cryo for the double damage melt. Likewise for Electro, you could get Cryo for a physical build for Superconduct, Hydro for Electrocharged, or Pyro again for Overloaded. Again, here we have a summary of the reactions we've already seen, but might help you to understand better or allow you to visualize or memorize more as you get more exposed to this via different texts and images, or at least that's what I had in mind when I put these here. Pause the video, give it a read one more time, study it, understand it, watch the whole video again if need be, as these are the very fundamentals of the game around which everything revolves, so if you don't understand these, then you won't be able to do anything within the game. So guys, you have to understand that this game doesn't have a Pokemon style strengths and weaknesses kind of typing that influence damage. Instead, it's a nice play, a dance if you will, of reactions that you create by switching between and using different characters and their abilities on the field. Now I'll go very briefly about the shields, as they will be the bane of your life if God forbid you haven't brought the anti-element. In short, you use Pyro against Cryo shields, Cryo against Hydro shields, Hydro against Pyro, Overload, Geo or Claymore against Geo shields, Cryo against Electro, and you never use Anemo against any of the shields. You could also use Pyro against Hydro, Electro against Hydro, Pyro against Electro, but these will have a reduced effect, meaning you will have to hit them more times to break the same shield. Shields have an amount of hits that they need to take depending on the element, not necessarily an entire health pool, but more like 3 hits with Pyro or 5 hits with Electro, etc., something along those lines. On that note, also bear in mind as a little tip that for some reason charged bow attacks, which are called aim shots in the game, can take shields down faster. For instance, if you bring a level 1 Ember with no items, she can still 3-hit a Cryo shield regardless of anything. And here are the findings of a really nice guy over at Reddit on the scalings of reactions. They will hold true in principle for the most part, but don't memorize the numbers, just get a gist of how they work and what the ratios are instead, as we've talked about earlier. And these are the hypothetical formulas some other nice person over at Reddit has arranged for us. The principles I described is all you need, really, but it's nice to have some math behind it as well, just to see that the numbers do indeed check out. Here are some charts based on this data as well as the formulas I've just shown you. Again, you can pause the video and have a look at them. Once again, you have to remember that the triggerers elemental mastery and level is what matters at all times for transformation reaction. It's same for the spawns that they leave on the field, such as Oz or Gooba that trigger the reaction. This will cause Xiangling's or official's elemental mastery and level to matter, not the other person on the field. The overall damage that is influenced by attack, elemental or physical percentage damage increases, and crit is really what matters for amplifications, which are melt and vaporize. But know that EM also helps a little by increasing the multiplier by a certain percentage. And these are essentially the key takeaways from this video. Now here's some extra advice and a tease towards another video in the future where I'll show you how to build particular characters and teams around them. We'll go over them really quickly, so you should try to opt for a Pyro main DPS if possible, but ultimately focus on transformations with little to no investment early on, as they will not require anything apart from, let's say, levels on your character and maybe an elemental mastery set bonus that gives you some elemental mastery without you sacrificing the main stats on your artifacts. And then later on scale into amplifications, as late game they will do much more damage since they essentially multiply your total damage, rather than getting the extra instance of damage that is flat, that is transformation. And last but not least guys, remember that it's a PvE game that you can play at your own pace, but at the same time also be realistic and never forget that it's an Asian gacha and it will eventually scale worse in the future most probably. And even though you can clear most of the content that exists right now with just story characters, later down the line this might no longer be the case, because you have to understand that MiHoYo's monetization will solely depend on people pulling more and more wishes, more and more characters. They will introduce more characters later on, they will introduce more challenges later on, which will probably require you to have those said characters, new weapons, etc, etc. Alright, that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helped you in one way or another. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. It really helps me immensely. I've yet to hit the 1k subscriber count for my channel to start getting monetized. Also, don't forget to drop a like on the video and comment down below for the YouTube algorithm gods. And of course for Paimon's sake, otherwise she will be in my next sandwich. Okay, enjoy your time with Genshin and I'll see you next time.
You